There's a lot going on in the world today, and I'm going to start a series about biblical manhood and womanhood. And basically, what I'm going to do through this series, I don't know how long it's going to be, but I'm gonna trace a biblical theology of manhood and womanhood, so that we can discover together, like what it means for men to be men and what it means for women to be women. Now, in Genesis chapter 1, God creates humankind. On the sixth day, he creates animals. He creates animals after their kinds. And then he creates people, but the detail is different. He creates people after his kind and in his image. And there's a beautiful detail in the text that he created them, man and woman, in his image. So God has a very intentional plan for men and women upon the earth, within his creation, and men and women together are the image of God. John Locke, in his political philosophy, based on this fact, declared that God desires equality among people, that people are equal by order of creation, because it is man and woman who are created in the image of God. And all people then are image bearers of God. We all have the divine image. We are God's fingerprint, his signature upon his creation. And it's a man and a woman together, equaling the fullness of the image of God. So men can't do this on their own. Women can't do this on their own, which Paul gets at in 1 Corinthians. Anytime we read, in fact, any description of the relationship between a man and a woman in the New Testament authors are always alluding back to Genesis 1 and 2 and 3. Everything about marriage, when Christ teaches about divorce, when we see in Scripture about what men are doing in the church and what women are doing in the church, it all goes back to Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3. Now, what I find most interesting about the equality of men and women, especially in today's culture, is that we lose any sense of what it means for men and women to be equal. I mean, just listening to what's going on in my society, where there is a cancellation of the definitions of men and women, and where men can choose to be women, and women can choose to be men, and men are competing in women's athletic events, such that women now have become oppressed in our society, and children have become oppressed in our society. It's like all of the progress we actually made toward equality is now gone, and we have to wage that war again, so that men and women can be equal again in society. Right. So this is an important topic for us to talk about. And when we think about biblical manhood and womanhood, it's really, really important to maintain Genesis chapter 1 as our foundation, as our background for every other verse of Scripture that speaks about manhood or womanhood, the relationships between men and women. Because in Genesis chapter 1, we see people are equal. God gave people a command, right? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and rule over the earth. This is the job of men and women. I mentioned that men can't do this alone, right? Men can't have children without women. You know that, right? My 5-year-old knows that. He don't know how it happens, but he knows that, right? Women can't fill the earth and multiply without men. In our society, we can observe troubled children and adults who have grown up without either a strong father or a nurturing mother, like both of those roles being filled in the house, which are very gender specific, by the way. And when one of those components, and there are only two of them, right? A strong father, a nurturing mother, when one of those components is missing, people are more prone to mental health problems, to being anxious all the time, more prone to depression in our society. So this matters not only because society is confused and our children are being raised to be confused by others, but also because there are very real problems, mental health problems being caused because society is telling people they have to change to fit into some kind of category that society has now invented, or one of however many different gender categories there are, instead of just teaching like the Bible does. You were fearfully and wonderfully made. You were created for a purpose. God made you the way that you are for a reason, and you don't have to change what God made you to be in order to fit in. And people who do change or try to change what God has made them, it doesn't normally help. There's a very real medical, psychological condition called gender dysphoria, and it doesn't cure that. Like God really made us the way we are for a purpose, and who He created us to be is wonderful. He assigned us the sex that we have at birth because He has a purpose for us in that. We don't have to change it to please anyone, because God is already pleased with how He made us, right? So you don't have to do that. You don't have to change. So men and women were to multiply, fill the earth, and rule over it. Here we learn something about our purpose, the purpose for which God made us as men and women. And we'll talk about the roles as we move through Scripture, because there is no hierarchy here in Genesis chapter 1 whatsoever. God doesn't assign roles to men and women here in Genesis chapter 1 whatsoever. In Genesis chapter 2, He'll clarify a few things from which the rest of the Bible gets, what it says about the roles of men and women in the church and the family. But right here, there's none of that. All we see that men and women were created, a man and a woman, they were created together, being the single image of God, to rule the earth, to subdue it, to steward it. It is the job given to humanity to steward the creation of God, to, as men and women, strong men nurturing women, to take hold of creation, to govern the earth, to bring the justice and peace. We see this idea throughout all of Scripture. To reign as a representative ruler upon the creation, over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and all of the animals. We have purpose. And as we move through this series, and we see the different reasons for which God has created men and women, and we see what it means to be a man, or we see what it means to be a woman, my prayer is that things become much clearer for us in a confused society. My prayer is that young men know how to be men as they grow up, and know what it means to be a man, know what makes them a man. It's not preference, and it's not the way we feel. There's something else going on here. My prayer is the same for women, that we understand what it means, not me, but you, understand what it means to be a woman, and understand what God's purpose is for women upon the earth, because I think it is glorious. But we begin here with the idea of equality. Like we are equal by order of creation.